Imagine for a moment what it would mean to your standard of living if inflation in the United States were to shoot up to 30% a year. And if that sounds like something that would wreak havoc with your family budget, take it one step further. Take it to 30% a month or 1,000% a year. Well, that is exactly what has happened in Brazil, one of the world's major economies. Inflation reached 1,000% in 1988 and kept on rising. As we did when we first reported this story last March, we begin with an examination of what that means to the average Brazilian. I paid for this beer today in Rio de Janeiro. 4 years ago, I could have bought a refrigerator to put it in. And as for gasoline, the amount of Brazilian money it takes to fill up this gas tank today, for that money, you could have bought 2 automobiles, believe it or not, just 5 years ago. But then the price of bread here in Brazil has gone up 12,000% in just the past 3 years. Of course, that's not quite as outrageous as it sounds, because for years, Brazilians received automatic pay increases that more or less kept up with prices. The problem is, as inflation went from high to out of control, that system, they call it indexing, simply gave out. Prices left wages far behind. Today, making up a family grocery budget is an exercise in futility. Just look what's happened to the price of cucumbers. How much were these last week?
They cost 10 cents last week, and now they're 60 cents this week.
No.
Tanto assim?
Well, who can afford that?
Quem pode comprar assim a 60 centavos?
Ninguém.
Nobody.
Then who buys it?
Só em Marajá.
Just the rich people.
How did this happen? What went wrong? Well, first of all, Brazil has simply borrowed too much money from abroad. Borrowed it over the past 2 decades as the government went on a mammoth building spree. Multi-billion-dollar projects designed to exploit the country's vast natural resources, financed by foreign banks, many of them American. Back then, bankers were only too eager to lend money to the third world, so Brazil's foreign debt kept on building. $121 billion is the foreign debt here right now. Just the interest on that debt comes to $1 billion every month. Well, in order to buy those dollars to pay the interest on that debt, the Brazilian government has to print more and more cruzados. So, inflation. But the foreign debt is only part of the inflation problem. The main cause is domestic spending for a vast, frequently unproductive, often wasteful bureaucracy. A sprawling collection of agencies and ministries, literally millions of bureaucrats. And cynics in Brazil say thousands of names on the government payroll are pure fiction. Umberto Teschieri, an Italian-born businessman in Rio, says those bogus employees are known as ghost workers. Ghost workers?
Yes, people that died many years ago never existed.
But they still get a check?
But the computer makes a check and goes to a current account every month.
And it goes where? To the family?
I just don't know.
Or to the politician?
You don't know.
Somebody steals it.
Somebody gets it.
A lot of corruption here.
Yes.
At least the federal government still has money to pay salaries. But a few months ago, the government of the city of Rio de Janeiro announced that it was bankrupt. It seems so strange to be in a hospital and it's virtually empty.
It's strange and it's sad because we have...
Dr. Stella Alves de Souza is assistant director of a municipal hospital in Rio. For months now, these city hospitals have been barely functioning. This outpatient treatment center once saw 700 poor patients a day. Now it's padlocked shut. Most of its staff have been on strike for months, demanding pay that would at least keep up with inflation. But the Rio government says it's too broke to pay any wages at all.
The city is...
Broke.
Broke. Completely broke. If I told you how much we earn here, you will laugh.
How much?
More or less $90 a month.
No.
Yes.
$25 a week for a doctor?
Yes, sir.
So to make ends meet, professionals like Dr. De Souza have to moonlight, sometimes at 2 more jobs. We've been told that inflation is destroying the middle class in Brazil.
I think it has already destroyed. There's no middle class anymore. In every crisis, there are those who are getting very rich and those who are getting very poor. And in between, we're lost.
Tell me something. In the States, we keep hearing about indexing. Sure, inflation goes up, but salaries go up. So it's inflation without tears, they say.
Oh, there are lots of tears. Lots of tears.
Yes. But Carnival is coming in a week or two.
Yes, and
You
know...
will dance?
No, I won't dance.
Will people dance?
I think that people will dance because that's the only thing that they are getting for free.
Rich and poor dance together at carnival time in Rio. It is one of the few times that they mix. And if for the wealthy it is just a carefree diversion, for Brazil's poor it numbs the pain for a few glorious days. 58-year-old Isabel da Silva, for example, she's a housemaid, lives in a favela, the shanty town of Santa Marta in Rio. She is the main breadwinner for 8 of her 11 children and 4 out of 7 grandchildren who live with her. And life, she says, is becoming tougher all the time.
Everything's gotten worse for us recently.
Yes, everybody says the rich get richer, the poor get poorer.
Exactly. Everything's getting expensive every day. We just can't afford to buy the things. It's true.
Isabel works 8 hours a day, 6 days a week, her salary about $35 a month. And since money in Brazil loses value from the moment that you get it, Isabel, like most Brazilians, spends most of what she earns as soon as she collects it. Isabel desperately wants to move out of the favela. But for people like her, Brazil's inflation is quicksand. Despite all their efforts, they keep sinking deeper into poverty.
Como Deus quer, né?
God wills it this way.
Não entendo nada.
At this point in time, I'm not understanding anything about money in this country.
Tá tudo a gente sem saber o que vai acontecer, né?
Nobody has any idea what's going to happen in this country.
Most of Rio's poor live in favelas like Santa Marta, one of hundreds of shanty towns that sprawl above the city, home to almost 1/3 of Rio's population. The teeming slopes of Santa Marta alone hold about 20,000 people, and no one knows how many assorted animals. Its narrow alleys reek of filth and raw discharge.
See this sewage here?
Jeez, what a stench.
Yeah.
American Catholic Father Edmund Lysing has worked for years in the favelas. And how do these people support themselves? What is their income?
Well,
How do they keep up with the inflation?
They don't. It's a miracle. You know, when people say that the poor are ignorant, I say, I couldn't possibly have the intelligence to eke out an existence and live with what they get.
How much do they get? Come on through.
Today, they get about $30, $35 a month.
$30 a month?
Right, yeah. That's
And
the
for a
minimum
family of
salary.
6 or 8 or 10.
It's impossible to live.
So how do these people with 6,
That's
8,
why
10
they live like animals.
children?
They live like animals. If you ask a woman that tells you the truth, you say, do you feed your kids? She said, well, I feed them when they cry. And I give them what I got because I don't have anything. I know that they're hungry. And they're all suffering from worms, every one of these kids. We take the kids.
These kids up here on the
Every
steps.
one of them, because what they eat and where they sit and where they play is dirt.
In a clinic at the top of the favela, a doctor dispenses basic medical services. But people like Isabel, he says, can no longer afford to buy the medicine he prescribes. Worse, the doctor tells us, he's not going to be coming here any longer. His salary, in real terms, has dropped by 40% just in the past year. In order to survive, he's had to seek work elsewhere. Because of such cutbacks throughout Brazil, child mortality is actually increasing.
You know what we're creating in Brazil? We're creating a race that is going to be totally inferior. The people in the north are getting smaller every year. You know how small they are already? Malnutrition. Malnutrition.
Yeah.
These people here, these kids, we bring them in to run a theater. They can't remember 2 lines because their mind hasn't been developed. They've suffered from malnutrition when they were little tiny kids. When they're 7 years old, you can give them anything from there on, and they're not going to change. Their mind has been hurt.
And what
for the
you're
rest
saying
of
is
their
that
lives.
the cost of food has gotten so high that they can't be properly...
Exactly. There's
nourished.
no way they can nourish themselves. No way.
Despite the havoc that inflation is causing for the poor, many people at the top of the heap can stay even by manipulating their money.
Well, in this kind of inflation, we all float with inflation.
How does businessman Humberto Teschieri float with inflation? One thing he does is use a Brazilian banking device known as the overnight. People with at least $2,000 to invest can earn 1% interest per day on their money just by rolling it over day after day in special 24-hour overnight bank accounts.
1% interest overnight?
Well, when you have 30% inflation a month, basically, it's almost 1% a day. Well, you are not really making money. All what you're doing is keeping up with inflation.
Yeah.
But situation is so distorted that you have the tendency to think that you're making money.
A financial never-never land as Brazilians each day line up at their banks trying to decide where to invest their money that day. In gold, in the overnights, or take it out of the bank and put it in black market dollars. How best to stop their money from melting away?
They do it on an everyday basis. It has to be done.
And for those with big sums to invest, believe it or not, Rio's chaotic stock market has been a gold mine. By playing on the huge economic distortions created by inflation, the average share on the Rio Stock Exchange in 1988 doubled in value.
You mean over and above inflation?
Over and above inflation.
So something must be going pretty well for the rich in Brazil. They are getting richer.
No question of that. Because they have money and they move into the financial market, which has been very good to them.
So they speculate with money.
Right.
They play with money.
Or with raw materials.
One of the places where the rich play the most sophisticated money games is in trading rooms like this at the Bank of Bahia. Here, in just seconds, they're able to juggle huge amounts from one investment to another. The bank has doubled its profits every year for the past 5 years. And who are their clients? The very well-heeled, of course.
We sell inflation protection. That's what we do.
What?
We do inflation protection.
That's what you sell?
Yeah. So the business is becoming better because there is more protection needed now.
You read the bank statements of the banks themselves. They had one of their best years in 1988.
With 1,000% inflation.
Exactly.
And yet these people had their worst year?
Exactly. This was the worst year that I've ever seen in Brazil.
How come?
The people don't get to pay. The money is being made by money. Money makes money in Brazil, not work.
Such speculating, of course, such juggling of money does little for Brazil's economy. The wealthy invest in gold or bonds or dollars, but not in new plants or factories. And the favelas keep on growing, and the crime rate soars. This police helicopter is stalking bank robbers in a Rio suburb. Theft and assault are running rampant. And more, the wealthy must live behind chain barriers and armed security guards. Some see it as a kind of undeclared guerrilla war.
Rio de Janeiro has changed.
It has changed.
I mean, it was such a beautiful city.
I think it is a beautiful city, but it's not anymore a gay city.
Brasileiras e brasileiros.
In mid-January, Brazil's President José Sarney announced a tough anti-inflation program. He vowed to freeze wages and prices and cut government spending. But twice before, he has promised and failed to do the same thing, to curb inflation. So Brazilians who once had faith in him no longer do.
Let me understand something. Why don't they come out of these favelas and go down there and wreak havoc? Why is there no revolt?
Brazil realizes how weak they are alone. Alone, they'll be mowed down there. They'll kill them right off the bat.
The people out of the favelas.
Every one of them is deathly afraid of the police down there.
What's going to happen? What's going to happen?
I don't know. You know, the worst problem in Brazil is that people don't have hope. People don't believe in anyone or anything.
Can a new president change anything? What's going to change it?
I don't know. I would like you to tell me. I don't know. I'm sure that something has to change. It can't go on as it is. But how? With whom and when? I don't know.
The government's attempt to put a lid on inflation worked for a few months, and then, as most people predicted, it foundered. Prices are skyrocketing at about the same rate they rose before the program was introduced. Yearly inflation is now running at 2,000%. Against this backdrop, Brazilians go to the polls in November to vote for a president for the first time in 30 years. But the issue of inflation is so sensitive, and the prospect of belt-tightening measures so unpopular, that none of the 28 candidates have dared make it the top of their platform. And the government, just trying to hold things together till the election, says 30% inflation a month is, their word, manageable.